Regulation is looming for Facebook and Google, and they're not too happy about it. Facebook's been stocking up on antitrust lawyers, and now we have this story from the Daily Mail. We need to be big so we can invent the future and own that too. Google CEO begs regulators not to split the company up so that it can dominate advances in AI and quantum computing. Here's the thing. That's not entirely the reason why Google needs to be regulated and broken up. It's because they have a disproportionate amount of control over politics, public discourse. Everything flows from there. The opinions held by people are being skewed by social media, and it's warping their minds, and we need to do something about that. The problem is so listen, I'll put it this way. Social media is always going to have these problems. Maybe we can do something, maybe we can't. But what we can do is stop them from unilaterally deciding who is or isn't allowed to speak. That is up to the public to decide, not a massive privately, or publicly shared, but a massive international billion-dollar corporation. It's people like Sundar Pichai who says, we're going to ban certain speech. Well, who gave you the right to tell people what they can or can't say? And don't give me that private platform nonsense. We're talking about civics, not a private business. We're talking about telephones, platforms. Is YouTube a telephone or is YouTube the Wall Street Journal? Pick one. You can't be both. Could you imagine if you called your friend and said, man, I don't like X, and then all of a sudden your phone cut out and they canceled your service? Yes, that's a platform. Pick one and stick with it. So here's what we'll do. Let's read the story and see what Sundar Pichai had to say. Before we get started, head over to, where is it, timcast.com/donate if you'd like to support my work. There is a PayPal option, a crypto option, a physical address, but of course, liking and commenting are the best things you can do, outside of sharing the actual link, but subscribe as well. Engaging with the video helps it in the algorithm or something, I think. Google's CEO has made an appeal that the company should not be broken up as federal regulators and Congress are directing increasing scrutiny at the tech Goliath. Google's massive size allows it to invest in future technologies without worrying about short-term profits. Yeah, and you can still invest in other companies and not worry about short-term profits. A lot of investments are long-term investments, taking several years before you see any returns. Scale does offer many benefits. It's important to understand that, argued Pichai. Big companies are what are investing in technologies like AI the most. Yes, and other people would invest if it wasn't a massive international billion-dollar corporation restricting speech and people's rights. Pichai even hinted that if Google were subject to antitrust regulation, it would spell doom for American innovation, allowing competitors like China to seize the advantage. Well, I'll tell you what, China's already stealing our technology, so I don't know what you're doing to stop that in the first place. He said, there are many countries around the world which aspire to be the next Silicon Valley, and they are supporting their companies too. So we have to balance both, he said in response to a question about China. It comes as Google and other tech giants face withering scrutiny over privacy practices, censorship, the gutting of local journalism, and potential anti-competitive practices. Yes, because many of you may know this. One of my videos has been censored. I have a video. It's going on my main channel. I'm making sure this one's a big issue. YouTube is censoring journalism. I'm not exaggerating when I say that, quite literally. So I'll get to all of that, but the quick note, I guess, is that Project Veritas published an expose, some investigative journalism. Apparently, anybody who talks about it is getting flagged for privacy, even though all the other outlets are covering it. So this is a serious issue. But I'll go into depth in that in the next segment at 4 p.m. Those on the podcast may have already heard this, but the point I'm trying to make is they have too much power, and you're going to get regulated. When you cross the line and you violate public trust, you get regulated. The people have more power than the corporations, period. That's what the government's supposed to be doing. Let's read on. They say it emerged earlier this month the Justice Department will look at Google and Apple, while the Federal Trade Commission will probe Amazon and Facebook to determine if they abused their massive market power, setting up what could be unprecedented wide-ranging probes of some of the world's largest companies. Meanwhile, the House Judiciary Committee is launching its own antitrust inquiry into the tech industry, including Google. Asked about the various probes. Is it Pichai? I thought it was Pichai. Did I spell it wrong? Yeah, it is Pichai. Sundar Pichai. They say Pichai, misspelling, tried to project an air of equanimity, saying it was perfectly fine for companies like Google to be scrutinized when they get big enough. Scrutiny is right, And we'll participate constructively in these discussions. And hopefully the government actually does something and implements some kind of policy and regulation. And I always want to add this caveat because a lot of like anti-regulation conservatives say no because of free speech fears. The government can't restrict speech. They can only protect it. Any regulation on Google, Twitter, Facebook, or whatever pertaining to speech will ensure it, not restrict it. The story says the growing hostility to Google's market dominance has also appeared on the presidential campaign trail, with Senator Elizabeth Warren, a Massachusetts Democrat seeking the party's nomination, explicitly promising to break the company up if elected. I think there needs to be healthy debate, Pichai said when asked about Warren's vow. Any campaign has moments around that, but what matters to me is the healthy, thoughtful conversations around it. I worry that if you regulate for the sake of regulating it, it has a lot of unintended consequences. And that's another good point. Simply saying we need to break them up and promising to do so speaks nothing to me. I don't care if Google is one company or 100. I care about what they can and can't do. Okay? So you look at YouTube, for instance. YouTube is a video hosting platform. It's also an ad agency. Okay? I don't care if you separate them to different companies. I really don't. The same thing will occur. Like, you know what I mean? The issue is whether or not Google has a right to censor legally protected speech. So put them in the same thing, fine. It'll streamline things, okay, but protect the rights of individuals. On Tuesday, the U.S. Justice Department's antitrust chief suggested he'll take a broad view of how competition is harmed when assessing whether big tech firms should be broken up. Assistant Attorney General Makan Dalrahim also was clear in a speech in Israel that he is well aware that just two companies dominate digital advertising, though he did not name the two, Google and Facebook. Absolutely. And it makes it really difficult for any competitor. Now, I will say this. I'm really confused as to why, maybe I'm just ignorant of the issues, why other social media platforms haven't rolled out partner programs. I don't know how Twitter would do it. I got like 3 million impressions on Twitter yesterday. And it's not, there are people who get way more for sure, but 3 million, that means my tweet appeared in the feed of people over 3 million times. Okay, or around 3 million. It was like 2.8 something. So I don't know how you necessarily monetize something like that unless you put ads on my profile or in a tweet thread. It doesn't really seem to make sense. Maybe you could like put an ad underneath someone's tweet. I don't know. All I know is that YouTube does have a monetization system. Why doesn't Vimeo? Why doesn't any other outlet sell ads? Google and Facebook definitely dominate the ad marketplace, but they're not the only game in town. What's stopping any of these other smaller social platforms from doing partner programs? That's what gives YouTube the monopoly. Now, when it comes to AdWords, it's a complicated system, but I will say Google taking a massive cut of people's ad revenue is absolutely displacing journalism. And then when they go and censor my journalism, yeah, things start to look like a serious, serious problem. Well, let's read on. Google and Facebook's free-to-consumers services have long been used as an argument against antitrust action, with the companies arguing that their market dominance doesn't cost consumers. Consumers actually enjoyed lower prices during the height of Standard Oil's dominance, Dalrahim pointed out, referring to the company that was ruled an illegal monopoly and broken up in 1911. The current landscape suggests there are only one or two significant players in important digital spaces, including internet search, social networks, mobile and desktop operating systems, and electronic book sales, he said in the speech, which was published on the DOJ website. This is true in certain input markets as well. For example, just two firms take in the lion's share of online ad spending. So I'll do this. I want to stress, I am less concerned about the fact that Facebook and Google control a lot of, they have control over a lot of different sectors, and I'm more concerned about violating human rights. There's actually some really great benefits to actually being a large company and only having a few companies. So let me give you some examples. Cell phones and banks. Banks can be a problem, for sure. But there are some pros that we should absolutely talk about, because I don't want to sit here and just, kind of point everything in one direction. I remember the early days of cell phones. I remember, I think it was my mom had a cell phone that basically only worked in downtown Chicago, and if she tried to use it at home, it was like long distance or something. Because the cell company only had towers in downtown to service people while they were at work. For a while, there were a bunch of other companies. I remember I had a Cellular One plan back in the day, and it was insanely expensive. I couldn't even send text messages. But then something happened when they started to consolidate. Now, one phone works everywhere. In fact, you can use T-Mobile anywhere in the world. Well, mostly anywhere. That's kind of great. I don't got to worry about switching plans or calling anybody. My phone just works. Also think about banks. So when you have a big national bank, you have ATMs everywhere. It's actually way more convenient. The bank that I use I use a credit union, and it exists in very few places, which makes it really, really hard for me. So when you look at the, a very few companies controlling a lot of, having a lot of territory and being massive, there can be benefits. But I want to make sure I stress, I'm not here just to talk about monopolies being great. Quite the contrary. They're extremely problematic. They need to be broken up to a certain extent. We need to figure out what parts of Google and what parts of Facebook need to be removed, because it quite possibly could just be the advertising agency. Maybe we need a rule that says if you're a platform, you cannot host your own ad sales. It has to be delivered by third parties. I don't know. Because I definitely don't want to create a domino effect that destroys everything. And so I want to make sure there's balance here. And my bigger concern is protecting civil rights, individual rights. If Facebook, Google, Twitter, etc. Dominate the public sphere in terms of conversation and advertising, well, now we've got a problem. And perhaps the answer isn't breaking them up, but after a certain size, you must adhere to constitutional law, period. Because otherwise you're disrupting our civic process. So I'll leave it there. I am now going to record on the censorship I face. So stick around. That video will be up at 4 p.m. youtube.com/Timcast. I'm rightly angry, and I have a lot to go through, and it's really interesting stuff. So stick around, and I will see you shortly.